Hello everyone, my name's Laura Bennett and I'm the Policy Manager for Young Carers and Young Adult Carers at Sense. Um, sorry, at Carers Trust, sorry. And I was just going to kind of whiz us through some of the just an overview of the Children and Families Act and the Care Act. I think most of you are probably familiar with it, but just so that we can make sure that we're all on the same page, so to speak. So I'll go through those very quickly. Very happy to take questions at the end, and Chantel will be rejoining us to do some more presenting after me. So hopefully that will be okay for everybody. As Chantel mentioned, the webinar is going to be recorded. So this is looking at how the Care Act and the Children and Families Act interact. So when we talk about what's new, we're talking about two pieces of legislation, the Children and Families Act and the Care Act. Both of those are from 2014, but they came into force on the 1st of April 2015. And I think it's fair to say that, lots of local authorities are still finding it challenging to work out how to kind of work those out, as well as kind of implement those. And I think that's one of the reasons why we're doing this project. So there are better, more consolidated rights for young carers, young adult carers and their families as part of this piece of work. And previously, young carers' rights and sat across 3 pieces of legislation and 6 pieces of guidance, which wasn't possibly ideal. The National Young Carers Coalition was part of changing that, which included the Children's Society and us. And you'll see on the slides there a picture of some young carers who came to Parliament to talk to politicians about what needed to happen, as well as 2 ministers of state, the Minister for Education and the Minister for Health, who came together. So I guess it was education and health coming together to kind of make that change to make things work. Moving on to the Children and Families Act. So it's Part 5 and Section 96, which details the rights for young carers. And those are that local authorities have got to assess whether young carers in their area have got support needs, and if so, what those needs are. And they can carry out that assessment if they think the child has got needs. So that means that the young carer or their parent doesn't have to ask for an assessment necessarily. The local authority can offer one if the child asks them to, so that means that gives more rights to the child, which is great, or if the child's parent asks them to. And the local authority has also got to take reasonable steps to identify any young carers in their area. So moving on to the assessment. So the assessment is for all young carers under the age of 18 who have a right to an assessment of their need, and that doesn't matter who they care for, what type of care they provide, or how often they provide it. The assessment needs to look at whether it's appropriate for the young carer to provide or continue to provide care for the person who needs care, and what the young carer's needs are for support and their other needs and wishes, and looking at what it is that the young carer needs for their own education and training, and what the Act calls recreation, so hobbies, having a life, and that's work, so whether or not the young carer is in work or not. Assessments can be joint if everyone agrees, but a joint assessment isn't the same as the whole family approach, and Chantel's going to talk more about the whole family approach later. So moving on to the next slide. So in terms of who needs to be involved in the assessment, the local authority's got to ask the young carer and their parent for their views during the assessment, and the local authority's got to ask anybody else that the young carer or their parent would like them to about their needs as part of the assessment. So that could be a young carer support worker, or it could be the parent or a friend of a young carer. There's a bit more detail about the assessment in terms of regulations. So the assessment's got to be appropriate and proportionate to the needs and circumstances of the young carer. And the local authority's got to look at the young carer's age, understanding and family circumstances, what their wishes, feelings and preferences are, and in particular what the young carer is looking for from the assessment, so what their outcomes are, as the regulations call it. if there are any differences of opinion in relation to the care between the young carer, the young carer's parents, and the person cared for. And that's all, and as I mentioned, that's in relation to the care. So obviously of course there will be differences of opinion in family life sometimes. So this isn't about what constitutes a clean bedroom or what time is a good bedtime, but this is around what kind of care is being given. And before the assessment, so that everybody can make the best use of the assessment time, the local authority needs to give information about the assessment to the young carer, their parent, the cared for person if that isn't the same person as the parent, and anybody else that the young carer or parent wants involved in the assessment, so that they can take part. And that information's got to be accessible, and that could include being in another language, or it could include making sure that it's available if somebody has a learning disability, for example, or it could be around actually is the information accessible in itself. So if somebody has a sensory impairment and would need that in Braille or another format, for example. The regulations don't specify a qualification that the assessor needs to have, but the regulations do say that the assessor needs to be appropriately trained, and that they've got, so for example, under some piece of legislation, an assessor would have to be a social worker, for example. The regulations don't say that, but they do say they need to be appropriately trained and have enough knowledge and skills to carry out that assessment, and that they need to be appropriate depending on the young carer's circumstances, in particular the young carer's age, sex and understanding. And the local authority's got to consider any other assessment that's been carried out for either for the young carer or the person who's cared for where relevant. So that could be an assessment of a disabled child, for example, or it could be an assessment of a disabled adult, for example, if that makes sense. So there's a bit more detail in the regulations about the assessment. So the local authority has got to assess the amount, nature and type of care which the young carer provides or intends to provide. So it's always possible that a young carer might be going to become a young carer but isn't yet. The extent to how much that care is or will be relied upon by the family, including that wider family, to maintain the well-being of that person. So, for example, it could be that the young carer is providing a bit of caring, but not lots. But that still doesn't mean that it's not. It's still important to look at the impact that that's having on the young carer, and whether or not the care which the young carer provides or intends to provide will impact on the young carer's well-being, education and development. And there's more detail in the Care Act about a very wide definition of well-being. So it's important to consider lots of areas. And whether or not any of the tasks the young carer will be providing are excessive or inappropriate, particularly thinking about the young carer's age, sex, wishes and feelings. And there are lots of tasks that a young carer might need to perform that could well be seen as being excessive or inappropriate, but it's also about working out what the impact is on a particular young carer. So it could be, for example, that one young carer doesn't feel very worried at all about reminding someone to take their medicine, but another young carer, perhaps a sibling in the same family, does feel very anxious about that. So it's not always the task, it's about whether or not the impact is excessive or inappropriate on that young carer. Moving on to slide 13. After the assessment, the local authority has got to give a written copy of the assessment to the young carer and their parent. And we have heard feedback from some young carers and young adult carers that is something that causes them a bit of anxiety. So that may be worth some kind of sensitive practice work around that, around exploring what those concerns are. Because it's obviously important that as part of the assessment, young carers have got a chance to say how they really feel about the care they provide. And it can be hard for young carers to say how they feel about things. And so, they may worry that, oh, well, will my mum be really sad if she sees that I find it really difficult to support her, for example. The local authority also has to decide if the young carer has support needs. if there are services which the local authority provides which could meet those needs, and if so, whether to provide those services. And crucially, this could involve giving help to the person that the young carer looks after, so that the young carer doesn't have to do so much caring. So under the Care Act, one of the ways in which an adult can meet the criteria for support is on the basis of their parenting responsibility for a child. Again, after the assessment, a bit more detail and regulations. So a local authority has got to decide if any of the young carer's support needs could be prevented by providing services, possibly to the person cared for, but also to another member of the young carer's family. What the young carer's needs for support would be if the young carer didn't have to do any or all of that caring, any actions which should be taken as part of that assessment, and what would happen for a future review. So it could be, for example, that if it feels like things are going quite well, that the review could be quite a long time in the future, but if things feel a bit more in a period of crisis or uncertain, that review might need to be sooner. And to work out who else is in the young carer's kind of wider friends or family structure and who else could help support them. And then when we move on to transition to adult services, so a local authority's got a duty to carry out a transition assessment for a young person or carer to help them plan if they think they're likely to have needs once they turn 18. And there are 3 groups of people who have a right to that assessment, and the ones that we're obviously concerned about are young carers under 18 who are preparing for adulthood. And the significant benefit test is one to think about with the transition assessment. So if they're likely to have needs when they turn 18, the local authority's got to assess them, and the timing of that will depend on when it would be of significant benefit. And local authorities have also got to think about how they might identify young people who might need an assessment but aren't currently receiving children's services. The assessment's got to be person-centred, ensure that well-being is taken into account, and include any other person who the young person or carer wants to involve, and must be appropriate and proportionate to the complexity of that person's needs. The process has got to establish what current needs are and how those impact on well-being, whether the young carer is likely to have eligible needs, and any outcomes that the young person wishes to achieve. And there's between the Children and Families Act and the Care Act, it's a joint legislative framework, and there's carers focus across both acts. So it's also about thinking about families transitioning, not just the young person. The duties that are in both are on the local authority, and there are a variety of operating models. There's not a right or a wrong one. As per disabled children, education, health and care plans requirement for preparation to adulthood begins at 18. That's a good default time for young carers planning to start as well, if that hasn't already started. But of course it might start later if a young carer isn't known about until they're 16, for example. Transition can taper off, so there shouldn't be that sort of cliff edge transition at 18. These are the further information which I know that have already been sent to you and are on the MASK website. And now I'm moving on to talking about the Care Act. So in terms of carers and the Care Act does relate mostly to adult carers, and that's people over 18 who are caring for another adult. The Act has got new rules about working with young carers or adult carers of disabled children to plan an effective and timely transition to adult care and support. And the local authority needs to assess a carer's needs for support where the carer appears to have needs. This is different from the old law, which says that the carer needs to be providing a substantial amount of care on a regular basis. So the local authority has got to assess what those needs are and what those and what the impact of caring on the carer is. And it'll also consider the things that the carer wants to achieve in their own day-to-day life. And it's also got to consider other issues where the carer's wanting to willing to carry on caring and what they want to achieve in their own day-to-day life, whether they would like to, whether they work or whether they'd like to work, and whether they want to study or do more. And if both the carer and the person they care for agree, a combined assessment can be carried out. So as per the Children and Families Act, a joint assessment can be offered, but it's okay to ask for a separate assessment if that's something that would be helpful. And then there's got to be a support plan which will set out how the carer's needs will be met, including a personal budget. And I'm going to hand over to my colleague Chantal now.
Okay, so thank you, Laura. I'm Chantal, Senior Project Worker at the Children's Society. I'm just going to share some information with you about whole family approaches and the guidance that is available. So we know then that local authorities should ensure that adults and children's services work together to offer carers and their families an effective service, being able to respond to the needs of a young carer, the person cared for, and others in the family. And we know that this avoids the need for multiple assessments, where children and adults find they're expected to give the same answers over and over again to professionals from a range of different services that are coming into their homes at different times. We know that assessments of young carers and the people they care for are intrinsically linked. So this is why the legislation that Laura outlined allows local authorities to combine assessments. And this might mean that children's needs are assessed by a professional who will not have the same familiarity with children's needs as a social worker employed by children's services. But in carrying out their functions under the Children Act, local authorities are subject to a broad duty to promote all children's welfare. So the worker carrying out the assessment. So as I was saying, but in carrying out functions under the Children Act, local authorities are subject to a broad duty to promote children's welfare. And the worker carrying out that assessment will also have to consider the needs of other children in the family and the general circumstances of the child's parents and wider family. Under the Care Act, local authorities have similar duties to promote the well-being of adults with care needs and of their carers. And the concept of well-being involves taking into account a wide range of factors that will affect how an individual chooses to live their life. There are several tools available to support this implementation. So this document that I know some of you will have seen aims to provide practical guidance for practitioners working in adult social care in relation to carrying out assessments and developing plans which consider the needs of the whole family. So this is the Care Act and the Whole Family Approaches document. It doesn't cover all aspects of the Care Act, but it will assist practitioners in considering how to develop whole family approaches in line with the new requirements. It also considers how the Act works in tandem with the provisions of the Children and Families Act to create a cohesive legislative framework that allows assessment and support for families to be combined where possible. So there are some key parts to the document, and they highlight that they highlight 4 steps to support making whole family approaches a reality. And each of these steps is followed by key practice points that local authorities need to take into consideration when they're implementing whole family approaches. Annex A is really good and provides detailed information on new rights for young carers, so I'd recommend looking at that. And Annexes C and D includes practical tools and key practice checkpoints around assessment and care planning, and these can be adapted for local use. So what it outlines really is that in a council that thinks family, there's leadership and commitment across the council to a whole family approach, with particular protocols in place across a wide range of services, forming local partnerships to enable services to be coordinated. It says that families and carers are an integral part of the design, delivery and evaluation of service and support. And in a council that thinks family, there should be a workforce change programme, so training to ensure that these protocols are happening on the ground. It states that in a council that gets the whole picture, there's a joint protocol in place between children and adult services, and that makes it clear where responsibilities lie and how services work. Getting the whole picture means seeing each person as an individual as well as regarding their role as part of a family and a community, and it engages the expertise of all of their own needs, helping build on strengths and build resilience. So the document shows that there's a variety of ways in which an assessment can take place and still achieve a whole family approach. And all the approaches should be considered in relation to whether they are proportionate and appropriate to that particular family situation, as Laura said. It also states that a plan that works for everyone takes into account the well-being of all the family and the impact of any services and support on other family members. So where plans are integrated, a lead organisation is established to undertake monitoring and assurance, and it's clear about when a plan will be reviewed and by whom. And it states that plans should not be developed in isolation from one another, but should be developed in a more coordinated way. And finally, number 4 says check that it's working. So it says that in a council that knows its approach is working for the whole family, it can show the impact of the plan and the results being achieved, and that they're reviewed in relation to both the individual and the whole family. The plan is checked to see it's providing adequate support to ensure that children are not expected to offer inappropriate or excessive levels of caring. Thank you, everybody. So another document that I want to share with you is No Wrong Doors. This helps to promote working together not only between adults and children's social care services, but also it recognises an enhanced partnership working with health and third sector partners. This updated template offers a framework which professionals can use to provide personalised and joined up support for young carers and their families. And this should apply equally when working in partnership with colleagues in health and the third sector, and include where local authorities delegate portions of their assessment process. So this might, for example, include carers centres contracted to undertake carers assessments, or mental health services hosted within NHS trusts. And where one person holds both statutory roles, the memorandum template may still be relevant for those to use by their operational leads for adults and children's social care within the organisation. There's also some supporting information to use alongside No Wrong Doors. So this is intended to assist professionals working with young carers and their families who might not have a background in children's services. And it's really to encourage a shared understanding of children's needs so that young carers, the people they care for, and others in the family are provided with effective support. And this document was developed with substantial help from officials in the Department for Education. So on to slide 31. The whole family pathway, which some of you I know will have seen, but this was developed by the Children's Society, and really it's to ensure that however a family, parent or child in need of support first makes contact with an agency, that the same key points are followed. Pathway is a resource for all practitioners in every local authority across England, and it's a resource that's not designed as a book to be read from cover to cover, but as an electronic tool so that you can access information and sections of the pathway that are most useful to you. I just wanted to give an example here that we've had from Halton. It's a case study where they described the situation as being a stuck calf, and they've implemented whole family approaches, and I just wanted to explain a little bit about how that works. The young carers in Halton now identify early and support through multi-agency working together. So early help is really underpinned by a universal offer, with all services encouraged to proactively identify those children, young people and families who need additional help and support, and it encourages them to take up services in order to reduce the escalation of needs. It's delivered across the age range of children from 0 to 19 and their families, and they're expected to actively engage in processes and developments to enable them to experience a team around the family or team around the family principles to support them. So multi-agency working Halton say is really crucial to the success of the early help offer. And its key really is the joint approach of children's and adult support services. For families that are affected by drug or alcohol issues, CRI, their local drug support service, have allocated a Think Family Recovery Coordinator. And they work in conjunction with children's centres, health visitors, midwives, carers centres, children's services. They're very busy offering coordinated support to families and the provision of services in the home and at family-friendly community environments. All the home environment assessments have been set up to be automatically booked into the Think Family Recovery Coordinator's diary for any of the adults who are identified as having children. This approach promotes the early identification of young carers. Halton host weekly multi-agency working together meetings to jointly consider all service requests for children and young people that are not requiring social work involvement or intervention. And that allows the agencies with relevant current or historical involvement with the families to facilitate joint introductory visits and enables a shared approach. Similarly, in Halton, clear pathways are in place for families to receive ongoing support once stepping down from social care involvement, so that improvements and positive outcomes are sustained until the family are again ready to access only universal services. We have more case studies that are coming through and are being collated and will be available on the Making a Step Change website. And also, if you have any that you'd like to share with us, then please do send them over. What I'm going to do is I'm going to open up to questions and answers more generally. So if you have any questions for myself or for Laura about the subjects that we've covered, then please type them away and we will respond to you. Okay, so one of the questions that we received previously was around understanding how transition assessments and support legally fits with sibling carers, as it seems to focus on the adult cared for.
Shall I take that one, Chantal, or?
Yep, go ahead, Laura.
Cool.
I'll chip in.
Okay. So whether or not the person being cared for is a sibling or not, that young carer has still got a potential right to a transition assessment and to have some kind of support plan in place to help that young carer and their sibling adjust to things being different. So it could be, for example, that if a young carer and their sibling currently attend the same school, but the young carer is either going to stay at school and the sibling isn't, or vice versa. So perhaps the young carer is going to start college and the sibling is still going to be at that school. There could be extra support that needs to be put in place. Those could be an example. And although it isn't, because the rights to supporting siblings are in, sorry, the rights to supporting young carers at transition are in the Care Act, so it would apply to both of them. But it might be that it would depend how old the sibling was, so they might have their transition planning at a different time, for example, but that could be included in their own transition plan. Does that make sense? Type if not, or email Kate if not.
Also just wanted to say that, you know, the wording actually is about any cared for person. So in the shared understanding, it says who provides or intends to provide care for another person of any age. So it doesn't necessarily say adult or parent. So although sometimes it might seem focused on the adult cared for, in the guidance, it actually doesn't specify whether it's an adult or a sibling or parent.
There's another question that's come through on the chat box, and the question is, what if you have a situation where a parent is refusing to accept their child is taking on a caring role and will not let you do a young carer's needs assessment? And a bit of further information, the child is 8 years old. I should start by saying that I'm not a social worker and I'm not a lawyer. However, my interpretation of the law is that, and I think this is where it does come down to really sensitive practice working. So, you know, imagine that was a safeguarding assessment, for example. Social workers would find a way, or whoever would find a way of working with that family to support them. And the Children and Families Act is clear that it's about the rights of the child. So if a child would like an assessment, and if the young carer and if the local authority would like to offer the young carer an assessment, they can do that. I can see that that's difficult, because obviously you don't want a situation where people are kind of, you know, forcing their way into a home to offer a young carer's assessment. That would obviously be not a good example of sensitive practice working. But it is around, you know, how can that young carer, how can that child be supported? You know, we have, as a society, we have different responsibilities to children than we do to adults, and in this, you know, in the same way that an adult carer would be entitled to an assessment, even if the person they cared for didn't want one, it's the same for a young carer. And of course that's going to be down to really sensitive practice work, but it is about focusing on what's best for that young carer, and an assessment of their needs could well be that. Chantal, did you want to add anything?
No, I think that's really clear, Laura. Like you say, it's about sensitive practice, and it is similar to how you would approach that situation under a different assessment. We have another question that was a bit further up in the chat box, which is, can the local authority delegate all responsibility to young carers service providers? So I would start by saying, you know, the terminology, as in delegating it all to somebody else, doesn't really fit well with joint working and multi-agency working. The idea really is that you work together as organisations. I know in some areas it might be that young carer services are taking a lead, but it would really need to be a multi-agency approach. Is there anything you want to add to that, Laura?
Yeah, I think if we're going for absolutes, yes, they can, but it's also worth reminding ourselves that it is always the local authority's responsibility to comply with both acts. How they choose to do that is, of course, up to them, and it may be that they feel that a voluntary sector provider would be the best person to do that, but it is still the local authority's responsibility to make sure that their legal duties are being met. How they choose to do that is up to them. So, for example, some local authorities have a particular service in children's service or a particular service in adults, for example. Some local authorities don't have children's and adult services in that sense, but it is about the local authority's responsibility. So, and I think as Chantal says, it's not just around going, oh well, the voluntary sector have got that, so they're doing it. They might be doing that, but it is also, there will need to be referral routes into the local authority, for example, potentially, even if the young carers service provides support service, there could be other referrals that will need to be made. And it is the local authority's responsibility to make sure that those duties are being implemented.
Thank you, Laura. So we have another question. Are the acts for all professionals across all services? So, for example, should an adult mental health frontline worker assess a young carer if they identify one? So, go for it, Laura. Go.
Okay. Oh, sorry, Bill's, for those of you who can't see the chat box, Bill Badham is working with the Children's Society as part of this project. So Bill just has had a helpful clarification, which is very beautifully summed up. So a local authority can delegate activity, but they can't delegate accountability, which is beautifully put. And I'm going to steal that and use that in future things. So hopefully that will be helpful. So yes, you know, any service provider that the local authority feels is appropriate can do it, but they are accountable. So you can delegate activity, but you can't delegate accountability. If we go quickly back to the mental health, so the question is, are the acts of professionals across all services? For example, should an adult mental health frontline worker assess a young carer if they identify one? I guess it depends. If we're talking about a mental health frontline worker who has who has a social care responsibility as opposed to a health responsibility, I guess that might be worth thinking about. And I guess it is how things work in the local authority, which I think brings us back to the Memorandum of Understanding and why that's so important about how things are going to work, both within the council, so both within social care, so thinking about mental health, thinking about learning disability, thinking about substance misuse, thinking about adult physical health, thinking about adult mental health, as well as children's services, and also how they're going to work with health, because mental health is obviously one of those tricky areas where some services might be provided by a health service and some services might be provided by the local authority. And so I guess that would be something that would be important to clarify locally. I'm not sure how it interacts with the Mental Health Act, for example, or mental capacity. That is something that we could try to do a bit more digging in and find out if that'd be helpful, and we could possibly put the answer in one of the Making a Step Change newsletters. Chantal, did you have anything to add on that?
No, I think you covered that, Laura. Thank you.
Hi, everybody who's joining us on the phone. We're going to unmute you in case you have any questions to ask. So just 1 second. So you are now unmuted if you want to ask anything.
Hello, do we have any questions on the phone?
There's another question that's coming on the chat box, which is, are there any examples of transition assessments which can be shared? Would anybody like to take that one?
Bill here. Hello, everyone. Just to say, I know Surrey's on the phone. I think they might like to speak to this, but Surrey's interesting in that you don't, as I understand it, have introduced a sort of specific transition assessment, but you use your current excellent tools, don't you? Is that right? No sound from Surrey. I'm pretty sure that's correct.
Hi, can you hear me? Can you hear? Yeah. This is Surrey.
Oh, here we go. Yes. Yes, we can hear you.
Yeah, at the moment we don't have a specific, we just use our About Me and, well, more the eye care assessment tools to create a conversation and then decide where the level of need, what kind of needs the young person has.
I will also add as well, if it's Fraser here from the Carers Trust, I will also say that Liverpool, we will be showing around examples of transition or how they embed it from our trailblazers down the line. So I know Oxfordshire have just launched their transition workers very soon, so hopefully they'll have some stuff to let them. Liverpool have got they got a young adult care worker, so they've been doing some work for a while. So hopefully down the line we'll be showing some examples of how they're doing it through transition assessments or the ways they're doing it. So I guess hold it, and we'll get back to you soon on it.
That's great, thank you.
I wonder if there's a lull. This key question about the accountability and delegation. I wonder if any of the local areas would like to chip in about how you feel it's working between the local authority accountability and the delegation of activity. Because, of course, there's a risk with commissioning that unintentionally you sort of pass the buck. But would anyone like to chip in about how you feel it's working in that relationship?
Hi.
Hello.
Hi, it's Tracy from Stockton.
Hi, Tracy.
You all right?
Yes, good, thank you.
Good, good. Just sort of in response to what Bill's just said, really. I'm just really kind of baffled in terms of that sort of. I understand, obviously, they can't delegate, and it's about accountability. But I'm still concerned that it's going to come and land back on young carers service providers in terms of local authority, how do you do this? Or our local young carers service does all of the assessments and does all of the planning and things like that, and I'm just really concerned.
I don't know if anyone in Liverpool was on the webinar at all. Is anyone from Liverpool on there? Because I mean, it'd be interesting because I can say for Liverpool they've devolved responsibility assessment to Bernardo's, and
Right.
we can. I'm sure we can put you in touch with them if you would like.
Yeah.
And then you can talk about in conversation with them how they're doing it and how it works, because that's part of that. I think that'd be really probably useful for you to understand.
Definitely.
Yeah, because I think probably get past some of your worries as well, because I think that that is a working practice arrangement they've had already in place before the before the legislation changed anyway. So, okay,
Right.
I'll make sure Ben and I put you in contact with them.
Great, thank you very much.
Thank you, Fraser. Did anybody else want to add to that?
Hello, it's Daniel here from Carers Trust. I just wondered whether Verity was able to speak and expand on the transition section that she's written in the conversation thread.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Oh, right. Sorry. There's a line through my microphone, so I assumed you couldn't hear me. Yeah, I was trying to add, but rather badly typing at the same time. Yeah, thanks, Daniel. So we were, well, in the best will in the world, ready to go live with a young carers needs assessment as of the 1st of April, which we have been using since that time. Which is a work in progress. I think it's doing well, but we have now employed 3 new transitions workers. So we also have put a section within that young carers needs assessment specifically around transitions. Our transitions workers have only been in post about a month or so, so we're still trialling it at the moment, and it is going to be developed as we sort of move through this journey. But so far, it seems to be working quite well. So watch this space, really. But I'm sure, I mean, Deborah, my manager, couldn't attend today, unfortunately, but I'm sure we would be happy to share that, but I'll have to go and check that with her.
That's lovely. Thank you, Verity. Okay, thank you, everybody. If there are no more questions, then we will say goodbye. All of the resources and things that we shared, the case studies, will be available on the Making a Step Change website. And if any of you have any further questions after this, then feel free to email us at the email address provided, mail@makingastepchange.info. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Thanks all.
Thank you.